It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Dov Herbert Maxwell. We here in your beautiful home in Jerusalem. And Dov, you were born in Vienna.
Correct.
And you later...
1936, June the 8th, 1936.
So if you could tell us about your family and your upbringing.
My mother was also born in Vienna, but came from a family that was based roughly in majority of them were in Hungary. My father was born in 1903, and my mother was born in 1908, I think it was, and but my father was born in Lencuț, Romania. I'm not sure exactly where that area is, but I remember there was some connection with Sadigur Hasidim. And my father came from a family. My grandfather had a store in Lencuț. It was a general store, and he married and he had 4 children from his first wife, and then she became ill. I don't have the dates or anything like that, but she became ill, and my grandfather remarried to another lady and had 2 sons, one of which was my father. And I remember my father's name was Mordechai, and his brother was Karl, and named Karl. And I met Karl here in Israel, and we had quite a close relationship with Karl and his family. Then the second wife, after a period of time, became ill also, and my grandfather married her sister, who was a young, basically, I think, just over 20, 21, something like that. And when she came into the family, they were a lot of the children were older than she was, but she was a very strong character, and I was fortunate to meet her when she made Aliyah with my 2 uncles, Vili and Lonu, who ran a textile factory in Romania. The textile factory made beautiful materials, mostly cotton materials, and they eventually, what happened to the factory was that when the Nazis came, they wanted to schlep away my 2 uncles, Lonnie and Vili. And my grandfather, Pepe was her name, she was, like I said, she was a strong character, and she said to this Nazi officer, "You're being really stupid, because my sons are experts in producing really good cloth, and they could use this factory that we have to produce materials for the Nazi Reich." So the Nazi officer got some sechel, and he decided to let them go. And they ran this factory actually for the whole part of the war, producing materials for what the Nazis needed. And after the war, when everything was destroyed around it, but the factory was still in good shape, they started running it again until the communists came in. When the communists came in, they said this factory does not belong to you anymore, it belongs to us. And what you have to do, we will tell you, we will instruct you, and you have to do what we say. My uncles and Willy and Lonnie were very upset about all this, and they did what they were told for, I think, a year or a little longer than a year. And then Lonnie's father-in-law had escaped to Paris, where he set up a textile wholesale business. And Lonnie said to Willy, how about we try to escape and go to Paris, and we'll join my father-in-law, maybe he'll take us in and we will get our panossa from that. So they escaped on foot over the mountains in Hungary. They got into Hungary, over the mountains, through the border, over the mountains, and from Hungary managed to find their way to Paris. We didn't know that they were alive, and I don't know how they found us, because we were in England. But they found us, and somehow we got some sort of a message from Paris that they are there. And immediately my father, my mother, this was 1948, decided we have to go and see this family. So we went. Now my uncle Willy was a child prodigy on the violin. He started playing the violin when he was 5 years old. He hadn't played on the violin all the time during the war.
I think you have a picture.
Yeah, this is a picture of him when he was very young, and this is a picture of Lonnie, his wife Betty, who is still alive and living in Tel Aviv, and my grandmother, although she wasn't my real grandmother, she was the sister of my grandmother, Pepe. And so what happened was they managed to get into Paris, and in Paris my uncle Willy decided to take up the violin again, and he went to the Paris Conservatoire and learnt. He had a contact with Yehudi Menuhin, who was one of the top violinists at the time, who heard him play, and he made a record and he sent it to Yehudi Menuhin, and then Yehudi Menuhin gave him a letter. Willy Engler is an outstanding violinist. So my father wanted to get him an interview with the BBC Concert Orchestra to do solo work. And the BBC were very interested because he got this letter from Yehudi Menuhin. And what happened was, at the same time the BBC had showed interest, the Israeli Philharmonic showed interest in my uncle as well. And they were just on a planned trip to 35 countries in the United States. And my father said, don't go with the Israeli Philharmonic, go to do the solo work with the BBC. My uncle Willy said, where am I going to get a chance to see 35 cities in the United States? I'll go with the Israeli Philharmonic, I'll be one of their first violinists, and go to the United States, and when I come back I'll go to the BBC. Of course, when he got back and he wanted to show interest to do solo work with the BBC said, we're not interested. We gave you a chance, no more. That was it. So he never made it. But they lived in Paris for many years, until, not many years, a few years, until 1952, and they came on Aliyah, and my uncle Lonnie set up a factory in Svat. They got some sort of a loan from the authorities in Israel to set up a textile factory, and they made beautiful cotton bedding in Svat. It was so good that they didn't find a lot of customers because it was a little bit expensive, and within 2 or 3 years they had to close the factory. It was too. I still have a set of bedding from them, and it's lasted all these years, and it's fantastic. It's beautiful. But that's life. You've got to be not only producing excellent materials, but you've also got to be economic. Okay, what would you like me to speak of now?
What about your mother's family? Your mother's family. Your mother's family.
My mother's family, okay. My mother's family, as I said, was mostly based in Hungary. Unfortunately, around 40 of her uncles, aunts and cousins were sent to concentration camp, and my mother had no contact with any of them after the war. I think they were all exterminated, and unfortunately that was it. My grandfather, my mother's father, my mother did not want to leave Vienna because my grandfather, her father, was frail and couldn't look after himself. So she said to my father, although we've put in for visas to go to the United Kingdom, to England, I don't want to leave until there's somebody to look after my father. And in January 1939, there was a place for not only my grandfather but also her brother. I'll explain a bit more about that. There were 2 places in a Jewish old age home in Vienna, and at that point my mother said, okay, I'm ready to leave. And we left in the end of February 1939. Now, what I wanted to explain was my mother had 2 elder brothers. Their name was Ernie, and Julius, and a sister called Margaret. Julius joined the Czech army against the Nazis. My uncle Ernie and his wife Rosie managed to escape to Switzerland because my uncle Ernie had a friend in the Swiss embassy in Vienna, and this friend enabled them to get into Switzerland. And my uncle Ernie and my aunt Rosie, who were first cousins, and so my grandfather Avram and his brother, I think it was Shaul, I can't remember his name exactly. They were brothers. They were brothers, and therefore Rosie's father, my uncle's wife, had her father in the old age home, and my uncle Ernie had his father also in the same old age home in Vienna. This went on they stayed in this old age home until I think it was the end of 1942, and then the Nazis took them to Theresienstadt, and for a good few months they were able to correspond that is my uncle Ernie and my auntie Rosie, were able to correspond with my grandfather Avram and his brother in the concentration camp. It was very unusual. The reason why they were able to correspond was because the country they were in, Switzerland, was neutral. So the Nazis accepted mail from Switzerland, and the Nazis allowed, with the Nazi stamp and with a censor, allowed mail to go into Switzerland. Now, after my aunt and uncle were Nifter, my uncle was Nifter. The last few years of their life, they lived in Frankfurt in Germany. I travelled a lot when I was around 24. I was a textile engineer. I'd learned this in Leicester at the university college, and I got a job in London as a knitting expert with a Jewish company. 2 Jews ran this company. It was a very successful company, selling textile machinery to all the communist countries. Now you would ask, why the communist countries? It was a time, 1958, when the communist countries wanted to build up their industries, and they needed the machinery for this. And so this company sent me to every communist country except China. China wasn't on the map as yet with regard to development in those years. And I travelled a lot in all these countries, and let me get back to what I was trying to say.
You went to visit your
Yes. Whenever I travelled, I tried to stop off in Frankfurt to see my only living relatives, my Aunt Rosie and my Uncle Ernie. And then my uncle was Nifter, but my Aunt Rosie stayed alive for another few years. And whenever I travelled, whenever I could, I went in to see them. And after she was Nifter, I went to her apartment. It was unfortunate because below her apartment she already had some dementia, and below her apartment there was a betting shop, a German betting shop, and they had made her sign certain things, and they stole from her a lot of stuff. But when I went through all her belongings, which were still there, I found this box of correspondence, postcards, letters, all with a Nazi stamp. And I kept them for a number of years until about 3 years ago. And I said, I have to give this to Yad Vashem. And I gave it to Yad Vashem. They then asked me, they told me at the time, this probably will take us a year or two to decipher, because it was written, all this correspondence was written in the old style of German calligraphy, and there was certain style, and they had to have an expert to go through it. They told me, I will never get the full picture, but I will get a synopsis of what this correspondence said. I don't know whether there's any secrets there, I don't know. Maybe there were somewhere, I don't know. Anyway, I haven't had anything. They've had it for more than 2 years now, and I haven't had anything from them yet, but I'm sure I will get it eventually. And this is why Yad Vashem asked me to do an interview, which I agreed to, And a lot of the data which I've told you now is in this interview too.
So Dov, in that correspondence, I think there you saw the death certificate, or that it was mentioned that...
No, I remember seeing the death certificate of my grandfather in Frankfurt when I visited my uncle when he was still alive. It was something at the end of 1943. I think they murdered him. But I never saw it again because I don't know what happened to it.
And can I ask, why did your uncle and aunt leave Switzerland and go to Frankfurt?
There was some business relationship that they had with a Jewish person, a Jewish man in Frankfurt, and they established a very nice fashion store in Frankfurt, selling knitwear, fashion, ladies' fashion items, and they either purchased or they rented an apartment very close to this store.
And did they have a family?
My aunt and uncle, the only family was...
They never had children?
No, they never had children. No, that's why I went to see them whenever I had the opportunity.
Sure.
They never had children. There was some problem there, and they were first cousins, and I really don't know exactly, but they didn't have children.
You kept the connection all the years? You kept a close...
Yes, I kept a close connection all the years. In fact, my uncle and aunt came once to Leicester to see us shortly after the war. My uncle and aunt brought a suitcase full of Swiss cheese and Swiss chocolate. I went crazy. Don't forget, during the war and after the war, there was rationing. You had a ration book, and you had little stamps, and you went to the local Macaulay, who was a very nice man, and you just, you gave him a little stamp, and he would give you so much butter, so much cheese, and that had to last you for a good few days. And when I saw this cheese and this chocolate, I went crazy, ate too much of it. Within 2 weeks, I had appendicitis, and I ended up having my appendix removed. Anyway,
so can I ask?
They were really very nice people. My aunt and my uncle, and I loved them very much, and I loved all my family very much. Yes.
You grew up in Vienna. Do you still have any recollections of growing up in Vienna?
I was 2.5 when we left in end of February. I was born in June 36. In end of February 1939, we left Vienna. So I was only just over 2.5 years old.
And I think you have some pictures.
Yes.
If you can show it.
That's me in the snow with a sledge in Vienna.
And do you have any memories, or you too?
I'll tell you about that in a minute. That's me in a pram, in a, what do you call it, a buggy. That's how the buggies looked like in those days. This is my grandfather and my grandmother and my mother. My mother was Nifta in 1935 in Vienna. In fact, my present wife and I went to Vienna, and we looked for her kever. We got information from the...
was this your grandmother?
My grandmother,
your
yes.
Grandmother.
And we looked for her kever, and It was a rainy day. We had to go out on a tram a long way out of Vienna, and it was a rainy day. It was muddy, and we looked all over the places which they told us it should be there. By the way, going along the paths, we saw a few kforim with my father's family, Engler, written on the tombstone, on the kforim, and I don't know where they were from. I know that my grandfather's first 4 children, I think, left Romania for America. But eventually we were looking after the problem was the kforim from 1938 they had reconditioned and they'd done a good job on them, but the kforim before 1938 they left most were on the floor and they hadn't been erected, and we were looking and I said to my wife, we look for one more, we can't find it, calling it a day. And this one was my grandmother's cabin.
The last one?
The last one. And we were full of mud and anyway, Baruch Hashem. Yeah.
You have a picture, I think, of your parents and you.
Sorry?
There's a picture here, lower down, of your that's of your parents, and then there's, I think...
This is Willy Halpern.
Okay. And this is a picture of your parents?
This is a picture of my parents, yes. In England.
And the one with Willy, if you can just explain, because that's a very interesting story that you mentioned.
This is the family of Willy Halpern. Willy Halpern was one of my father's best friends. He was a goalkeeper for Hakoach Vienna in a very good soccer team that traveled a lot of places all over the world, playing Jewish teams in different countries, and he eventually got to the United States. He'd left, I think it was in 1936, he left for the United States and managed to get into New York, and when my father contacted him about all the problems getting out of Vienna, he said, okay, I will sign for you, I will arrange a visa for you. And he did that. He arranged a visa for my father. Now, he couldn't do it for my mother for some reason. I don't know why that was. But the British authorities, on the strength of the visa that he got from America, the British authorities let my father into England for 9 months. And of course, we left February 39, and the war started in 2nd of September 39, and the minute that the war started, the police came, rounded up all the aliens, including my father, and eventually was put on the Isle of Man. Now, another word I'd like to speak about about signing. My aunt, Margaret, who I think I showed you a picture of my Aunt Margaret. This was my mother's sister.
And Margaret is the one on the, she's the one on the...
Yes. She looked after me while my mother went out to work. My mother worked, when we got to London, we came with nothing, and we did get some Nazi Reisepass, Fremdenpass, because a Nazi officer in Cologne asked, "Why have you only got travel papers? You've been living in Vienna for so many years. You've only got travel papers? Ridiculous." So they said, my parents said, "Yes." My father said, "I came from Romania. They didn't want to give me, although it's part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, they didn't want to give me a passport." And my mother said also, they didn't want to give me a passport. It was something to do with, because at those days, my parents got married only in the Jewish tradition, and you had to give your father's maiden or your mother's maiden name. And on my birth certificate, which I can't find at the moment, it doesn't say Herbert Engler, it says Herbert Herzberg. And because of that, and that was one of the reasons why they wouldn't give her a passport, apparently. Anyway, they got these Nazi passports, which are shown on that video that Yad Vashem have, and they have those passports too. Anyway, what I wanted to come back to is the fact that how did we actually get out of Vienna? To get out of an alien country into, the United States or the UK. In the UK, they asked for a deposit of £50 sterling. And in those days, £50 sterling was a lot of money. And not only did they ask for the money, but they asked to sign papers that whoever signed for any individual to come from an alien country had to be financially and legally responsible for that person. Now, my aunt, who had got out of Vienna into England in 1937, before the problems started, went to a family in the Edgware Road, very wealthy family. They were related to us, quite closely related. I'm not sure what the relation was, and begged them to sign for us. They wouldn't. They just did not want to sign for us. And so my aunt looked around. Where are all the other? Where could she get somebody to sign for us? And she heard that there was a family in Letchworth who had an estate there called the Sassoon family, who were wealthy Jews, and she went to them, and they signed the paper for my mother and for me. I was on my mother's papers. And it turns out that the Sassoon family signed for hundreds of Jews. Now, what is very interesting, about a year and a half ago, I started looking into this, and I contacted one of the Sassoons in New York. I think it was Rabbi Isaac Sassoon. And I started an email correspondence with him. I managed to get his email, and he had no idea that his family had signed for hundreds of Jews. He had absolutely no idea. So I asked him, would you please be so kind as to investigate and see if you can find any documentation. Now, I went as well to a number of institutions in London. It was just at the start of the corona problems, and they all came back to me, we can't help you at the moment, we're short-staffed, we can't look into all these questions you're giving us, because I wanted to find some data, written data, of what the Sassoons had done, because they never got any schutim for
They haven't really got the recognition that
They didn't get any recognition for anything they'd done. Now, Rabbi Isaac Sassoon, I spoke to him once, and he said maybe they didn't want the recognition. Maybe they wanted to keep it quiet. You know, sometimes to give tzedakah anonymously is better than to give tzedakah openly. So maybe that was in their minds. I don't know. But I wanted to find something written that stated that they'd done this enormous mitzvah, and I will, in Yetz Hashem, if Godesh Baruch Hu gives me koach and some more life, B'ezrat Hashem, I will keep on with this after the Corona problem. Please God will abate, and see if I can find out what is the position and how they apparently. Once when I spoke to this Rabbi Isaac Sassoon, he told me he believes that one of the Sassoon families does know something. So I asked him to look into it, but he's a very busy man, and I don't know if he's managed to do it. I haven't been in touch with him for 6-7 months, I think now. But I will follow it up, because I think they absolutely need the recognition and the schus of keeping Jews alive.
If they wouldn't have signed, and it was a major undertaking, and it was a lot of money, and it was a lot of responsibility they did, we wouldn't be sitting here today.
It was amazing.
They saved your parents and you.
Yes, yes.
And your father and mother, they often discussed with you that it was the Sassoons that signed the papers that allowed you.
Yeah, they knew. Yes, they knew, because I forget what the name of it is, but it's on that video. All the documentation which I sent with the video.
It's at Yad Vashem.
From Yad Vashem, German Relief Fund or something like that. It states, they sent data. We were very, very fortunate, because after my grandfather and his brother managed to get into the Jewish old age home, my mother said, okay, let us go. But the visa had not come through from Britain, from the UK, from England. So my uncle in Switzerland had been phoning or writing all the time for 2 years, get out, get out, get out, you won't have the possibility, get out now. So my parents said, okay, maybe we should go and try and get into Switzerland. And we got on a train, we tried to get into Switzerland. The Swiss authorities would not let us into the country, turned us back to Vienna. We got back into Vienna and got off at one of the major stations. I mean, I'm only telling you this because my parents told me all this, and I don't remember it, but I remember it because they told me this. They didn't keep anything back. They told me this when I was a lot older, not when I was younger. And when we got off the train at this major station, we got out into the street, and my mother sees a friend, a Jewish friend, and this friend says, Rebbeinu Shalom, I don't understand how Godesh Baruch Hu works. I've just seen you. Where have you been? So my mother explained, we tried to get into Switzerland and they've turned us back. So she said, don't go back to your apartment. The Nazis are already in your apartment. Go somewhere else. So we were in hiding for, I don't know how long it was, until the visa came through from the UK. And I remember something very, very vividly. My father was not tiny, but he was short, and he was very athletic. And he told me that the Nazis used to come to the embassies with a lorry, with a truck, in which there were a number of young, they called them brown shirts, Nazi youth, 19, 20, 21-year-old, I am a Nazi. And went to these queues that were outside the embassies, the American embassy, British embassy, French embassy, whatever it was, and they picked up Jews. I mean, the majority of these people in the queues were Jews. Picked up Jews, shoved them into the lorry. They weren't seen again. My father once, when he went to the British embassy, saw, and he was waiting in a queue, saw this lorry coming, and he dashed down an alley. He was very fast. He dashed down an alley and managed to avoid them. But Baruch Hashem had a father. I've got a lot of stories to tell, but
no, this
I'm
is
getting rather hoarse.
I know, but you're doing amazing. Do you remember leaving Vienna?
No, I have a photo somewhere of my grandfather in Vienna in the snow. Like I said, I was only just over 2.5, and must have been about just over 2 and a bit when this photo was taken. And I can't differentiate whether my memory remembers my grandfather or whether it is this photo. So I don't remember Vienna at all.
And where did you go? So where did you go from Vienna? You must probably went on a train.
We went on a train to Cologne in Germany, where this Nazi officer said, and we had to wait, I think it was a good 12, 18 hours in Cologne till the next train. It wasn't like today that you would get, immediate connection. The next train took us to the Hook of Holland, and then we got on a boat from there to London, to England. But like I said, in Cologne, while we were waiting, my parents got these Nazi Reisepass, which is a passport with a Nazi stamp, and I don't know. It's everything is Minat Shemaim. And
when you got to England, where did you go?
We went to London, and we got. I don't know how my parents got into this apartment. Maybe my aunt gave some money to it. I don't know how we did it, but it was a terrible, run-down, dirty apartment. I remember seeing a bed, a cot, and a table and 2 chairs, and I remember seeing a mouse in this apartment.
So this must be one of your first recollections, because you were so small.
Yeah. But I think what my father did, my father was quite enterprising, and one day he had a pair of shoes that needed repairing. So he went to a local shoemaker, and because we weren't allowed to work. I mean, my father was not allowed to work. My mother was allowed to work, but my father not. So my father went to the shoemaker and asked him to repair these shoes. So the shoemaker said, my business is so slack, the war is about to start. If you can collect some shoes from your neighbors, from your people that you know, bring them to me, and I'll deliver them back through you, and I'll pay you a commission. So my father did that, and he earned a few pennies. My grandfather in Vienna was a tailor, and he knew how to cut patterns, you know, for clothes. So my mother had learned this because my mother helped my grandfather a lot, and she saw there was a opening in a factory making uniforms for the British Army. So she applied for this position and she got it. She worked 12 hours a day for peanuts, for really, really nothing. But we existed. We managed to get a little bit of food. We existed, Baruch Hashem. And that was it.
And your father, he was taken away to the Isle of Man?
He was taken to the Isle of Man.
How soon after you arrived was he taken away? Was it when the war started?
The war started on the 2nd of September.
They invaded Poland on the 1st.
The 3rd or the 4th of September, the police came, took my father away. I think within a week or so, he was put on the Isle of Man. And my father said, I heard much later, that when he got to the Isle of Man, he noticed there were some strange faces. Not only were there Jews, a lot of Jews, in this camp on the Isle of Man, but there were also Nazis.
And they're all together?
They were all aliens. The British put them all together. They all stayed in this camp, and the Isle of Man is towards the northern part of, it's in the Irish Sea, towards the northern part of the sea, and sort of level with the cities of Liverpool and Manchester. And as soon as the Germans, the Nazis, started bombing Manchester and Liverpool. Liverpool was a big port, and Manchester was a big textile centre, so they wanted to destroy a lot of the industries in both of these cities and destroy the port, so they bombed it incessantly. And at that point you could see the bombings and the lights from the Isle of Man when it was a clear day. And the Jews immediately recognized who were the Nazis because they saw the light in the Nazis' eyes when they saw the bombing in these cities.
They were happy.
They were very happy, yeah, you know. So they knew who was who. And after a period of time, the British authorities got some sense and gave the Jews, they knew the Jews were friendly. They weren't Nazis. They were friendly. So let's make use of them. So they gave the Jews the opportunity to join the army, the British Army. And being British authorities, they made them go into the Pioneer Corps, digging ditches, hard manual labour, but I think 90% of the Jews in that camp joined the British Army. Why? Because it gave them an opportunity for their wives and families to come to see them in whichever camp they were, or for the soldiers to go back to see their families wherever they were in England. So there was at least, a possibility to see your family if you joined the British Army. If you stayed on the camp, there was no chance.
And how long hadn't you seen your father for?
I hadn't seen my father for well over 2 years.
It must have been extremely difficult for you and your mother.
I haven't seen my mother either because she worked for 12 hours, and my aunt, I'd only seen my aunt. And my aunt taught me to write, taught me, she brought me up. And my mother earned the money, and my aunt brought me up.
And Dov, you have a very interesting name, Maxwell, and can you tell us how your father got that name, Maxwell?
Yeah. My father's name was Mordechai. When he joined the British Army, they said to him, "We're not going to call you Mordechai. We don't know what Mordechai is." I mean, it's very topical at the moment because it's nearly Purim. But, so they called him Max. Now, when they called him Max, when a little later, during the war, the British got even more sense because they didn't use these German Austrian Jews for doing manual labor. They said, they speak German. We need them to listen into the German communications. So they gave them the chance and they trained them to listen in to German communications. Now, they said to each of them that they have to change their names. Our name was Engler, E-N-G-L-E-R. Engel is German for angel, so it was a German-sounding name. Why did they tell them to change their names? Because they used some of the Jews and they parachuted them into enemy country and to do spy work and to give them information. So, and if they were caught with a Jewish name, they would have been shechted immediately. So, my father, who was called Max during the army, said, "Okay, Max is doing well. I'll call myself Maxwell." And when he came out of the army at the end of the war, came out a bit earlier because he had some stomach problems, and the doctor gave him the opportunity to leave, to get demobbed a little earlier than the end of the war, was only about 2-3 months. Anyway, when he came out, all his papers were Maxwell. And it stuck, and I never changed it back.
And Dov, do you remember the encounter with your father when your father came back after having
I
seen
remember we stayed in Leicester once with a Jewish family. It was a very nice Jewish family. They had a big house, they gave us part of their house to live in. And I remember when my father came on leave from the army, they used to come with a truck, with an army truck, and they had this house had what do you call it, where the cars drive in,
a garage, type of garage?
No, not a garage, an area, just an open area and they had a gate at the end of this area. And I used to wait, standing at the gate, waiting for my father to come. And eventually, this army lorry came, and I see my father trying to get off, but the lorry went on. So my father jumped off the lorry, and I remember that very clearly. And my father got hurt a little bit, but he was okay, Baruch Hashem. And I was so happy to see him because I hadn't seen him for some weeks. So whenever he had leave to wherever the camp was, he came to see us. Now the last camp that he was in Leicester, and that's why we stayed in Leicester.
And you've got some very beautiful pictures. If you could show us about your parents when you were in England, in Leicester.
This is my mother. in Leicester, and
There's one with the three of you.
sorry.
Underneath, there's a beautiful picture of the three of you, with your mother and your father.
Yeah, I don't know where this was taken actually. And this was also in Leicester. Yeah, this was also in Leicester.
And that house behind, is that the house that you...
No, that was not the house that we stayed in. No, no. And this was my Uncle Ernie when he came to visit us once in Leicester.
So I'm just going to diverge, and I'm going to ask you, I think one of the most important questions is, which soccer team do you support?
I only support Leicester, and they're doing very well this season.
And when they won
They're second in the league.
when they won the Premier League, you must have been...
Oh! My father, because he was athletic, wanted me to be athletic too. And when I was just past Bar Mitzvah, I had my Bar Mitzvah in Leicester, and I think I was about 14 and a half, and the local Leicester Maccabi soccer team wanted players. They only had about 13 or 14 players. So my father went to whoever organised it, and he's still alive. He lives in London now, but he's still alive. I'm in contact with him. He said, by all means, let him join our team. So I played soccer for Leicester Maccabi. We used to go to all the Maccabi teams. It was a Sunday league. We used to go to the Maccabi teams in Birmingham, Nottingham, Coventry, even up to Manchester. And we sometimes played some of the Goisha teams, but I don't think we won one match because we had so few people to choose from.
And how long did your family remain in Leicester?
My family remained in Leicester. Let me see. My father had a jewelry watch and clock shop in Leicester, and they lived there probably until about 65, 66, yes.
And from where did your family go?
My parents then came to London, and when we made Aliyah in 68, my parents rented an apartment in Givatayim. We lived in Ramat Chen. Eventually we lived in Ramat Chen. We built a nice little house there. I had 3 children by that time, and my parents rented an apartment, and they were there. They had 6 months in London and 6 months in Givatayim. So we saw a lot of them, and they saw a lot of us.
And Dov, can I ask, when you grew up when your parents growing up in Vienna and you being born in Vienna, did you come from a very religious home?
My father was traditional. It was not easy to be religious in those days. He did whatever he could. I know that. And it was not really until he got back to Leicester that got out of the army and everything. He got a job with a very nice frum man who said he needed a manager to organise his stores. He had stores all over the Midlands in England, and he was a very frum man, And my father worked for him for a number of years, and then he went off to Canada and closed all his shops. So my father opened his own store. But that's when he went back to his religious roots. Yeah.
And did your parents used to discuss with you when you were growing up about the time in Austria, in Vienna? It wasn't so much discussed?
No.
Did they reminisce a bit about Austria or?
No, not much, no. I think they wanted to forget that time.
Did you ever go back, or did your parents ever go back to Vienna?
Yes, I went back to Austria quite often. I told you, I went back to find my grandmother's kever. I went, I was in Austria.
And your parents, did you ever go back with your parents?
No.
Did they ever go back?
No.
It must have been too painful.
Probably, yeah, probably. But when I was working for this Jewish company, I often stopped off in Vienna to go into, to go into Hungary or to go into, I sometimes stopped off in expense was not, was not a factor. So I used to fly to Vienna, hire a car, and drive into Hungary, or I used to have to go to some of the factories in Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, all these, the factories were not in the cities. I mean, this was industry, and it was outside in the countryside. And when I had the opportunity, I used to ask people, where were their synagogues? Where were their shuls? And a few times I was told where there were shuls, and I was taken. Like in Hungary, I was in a factory, a huge factory, and they took me to the synagogue that was there. It was in a village basically, but there was the shul had been reconditioned, and it was beautiful. Somebody had the key. I was shown in. It was magnificent. It had all been restored by the Hungarian authorities, and but not one Jew, not a Jew to be seen.
And Dov, how do you feel about today in Vienna? There's a very strong Jewish frum community.
The same as I feel about my children who don't live here. I think they're wasting their time. I think they're wasting their time. Europe was once a home for Jews, but I can't see it in the future. I can't see it being. I can't see it being that kind of home ever again.
On the positive side, in Austria, the president of Austria is extremely pro-Israel and pro-Jewish, and the head of the parliament is also extremely pro-Jewish.
I know all that, but
you're
there's a look. It's very difficult because I'll give you an example. My dear wife has a son in New York. Okay, he is he works for a real estate company, and they buy real estate for renting out storage space. He does the evaluations of, this real estate. Is it worth buying? What income can we get from it if we give it? Okay. And he works very, very hard. He's got 4 children. Erev Shabbos, okay, he comes home, if he's lucky, an hour, 2 hours before Shabbos, jumps into the shower and gets into his Shabbos clothes and is ready to go to shul with his children. Okay. Where is the preparation for Shabbos? Where is the... You see, you can't just jump into Shabbos. It's the same as like jumping into tefillah. If you ever get the chance, read the Baal Shem Tov. He will tell you, if you read his Sforim, and there's a big section called Amud HaTfilah. It's in Parshas Noach. It goes through all the Parshiot, but in Parshas Noach, Amud HaTfilah. That tells you exactly how to daven. Exactly how to daven. Now, I learned with Rabbi Weinberg from Shara Chesed. He told a group, I learned with a group on Zoom now, we're about 12, 14 people. He told us 2-3 years ago when we started learning the Baal Shem Tov that he came to Israel he grew up in the Litvischer world with Rav, I can't remember the name, sorry. But they came on Aliyah about 45 years ago, and his Rav opened a yeshiva, and he taught in this yeshiva. Rabbi Weinberg taught in this yeshiva. And by chance, about 5-6 years ago, he picked up this sefer of the Baal Shem Tov, and he read through it, and he said, I didn't know this before. I didn't know how to daven. This is something new. And he became friendly with Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Before that, he learned a lot here about Hasidus. He learned about Kabbalah. Did you know that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's father was the head of the Kabbalah yeshiva in Yerushalayim?
I'd heard, yeah, I'd heard.
And he gave Rav Shlomo Zalman the best Rabbonim to teach in Kabbalah. He said, it just does not go in here.
But you learned with Rabbi Lerman in England?
With Lieberman?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And you...
but I also learned, Rabbi Lieberman came on Aliyah the last 10 years of his life, and he set up this kollel in Tzfat, and I learned with his children. I'm in touch with the whole family. I get invited to all the simchas, and beautiful.
So Dov, I would like to ask you, you've gone through quite an amazing journey, and witnessing with real miracles, that when coming back from Switzerland, that they wouldn't allow you in and they sent you back, and if you would have gone to your apartment, they would have deported.
Right.
So you've really lived an amazing life, experiencing so many...
I can tell you some more, Nissim.
I'd love to hear.
When I came on Aliyah in 1968, finally the Aliyah was 68, in the end of 69, they called me to the army. And I went. And what are they going to do with a textile engineer? What are they going to do with me? So they put me into the Air Force. And they gave us they told me I've got to go up north, somewhere near what's that? That Arab town. Anyway, they told me got to go up north for basic training. I get there.
Maybe Nazareth?
No, further up. My memory is not what it used to be. I get there, and I look around. There's a whole group of Hasidic men there. I said, wonderful. I was so happy. There was a whole group of Hasidic men. 2 teachers from the Mir Yeshiva. One Chabad rabbi who was in charge of Chabad in Lud. 2 Gerach Hasidim. There was a builder from Yerushalayim. His name was Neustedt or something like that. He was a multi-millionaire. He was an amazing guy. Anyway, we did this basic training. Then every now and then we went on. We got together to do what do you call it when you have to do Miluim, yes. And then came the Yom Kippur War. I was in shul. Somebody walks in, puts a handkerchief on his head and calls out, Maxwell, middle of Musaf. I get out to him and he says to me, he gave me a slip of paper, you've got to pick up these 2 people. I said, where do we go? So he said, in the middle of, I was in Ramat Gan. He said, middle of Ramat Gan. So okay, I go back home. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. I get in the car, I start driving, the sirens had just gone, and one of my neighbors, who was a very frum guy, he'd gone to yeshivas, a lot of yeshivas, he saw me in the car, he got a terrible shock. And, anyway, I picked up one of these guys, the other guy wasn't there. I went to this place in Ramat Gan, nobody there, so I went back home. Made Havdalah, went back home. The following day, I hear on the radio that certain sismaot, I knew what the sismaot was, they called it sismaot, to go to the airport. I get to the airport, and they were already transferring because our base was in Bir Gafkafa, in the middle of Sinai. And I meet a lot of these guys, these Hasidic guys, and we get put on a plane. A lot of them had gone already, but we got put on a plane, they called it the sausage. It was an old French plane. We get on this plane, and we landed in Bir Gafkafa, in Refidim. Huge base there, artillery, tanks, air force, everything there. Huge base. Whole load of the guys there. What are we going to do? Where are we going to sleep? There was nothing organised. Nothing organised. So we all said, you know what? They had a shul there, like a hut, a big hut. That was the shul. We said, okay, really one shouldn't sleep in a shul, but we said, okay, this is the best place to put a mattress down. There were a load of mattresses. We'll put mattress down, we'll sleep in the shul. Next morning, get up, daven. I was with a South African friend who I'd known before, and they were building a big underground, in this Air Force base, a big underground shelter. And he said to me, he was a structural engineer, he said, they're doing it all wrong. As we were talking, we hear bombers, fighters in the air above us, bombs dropping. I just froze for a second, and I said, I'm going to jump into this shelter, because the shelter had already the banks ready, and the shelter was already built, but the concrete was not finalized. Anyway, I run down into this shelter, and there's a young guy sitting next to me, ginger hair, and he said to me, I know what's happening. The Egyptians are dropping the bombs on the runway, and they're going to drop the bombs, and the bombs bore holes in the runway. They don't explode immediately, they explode later on after they bore the holes, and then they explode, and it causes havoc with the runway. And he said, it's my job to defuse these bombs. So I didn't see him after that. And there were 8 chevra, 3 of them which were women who got killed on that day. A couple of days later, one of the officers called a group of us together and said, we need you to do a job. We're giving you 2 trucks and equipment, all kinds of large equipment. What happened was they built all over Sinai short runways, and they knew from the Russian SAM missiles, if the missile would hit an Israeli plane, either it destroyed it completely, but most of the time it didn't destroy it. You had to get that plane either back to base or down onto the ground. So they built these short runways. And the idea was, building these short runways, they save money, they save space, and they put a hook on the back of each plane. And if you know how a plane gets down on an aircraft carrier, it has a hook, and it catches hold of a wire, a thick wire like this, with 2 capstans on the end. And all these runways were ready, but the capstans and the wires were not ready, and that's what they wanted us to do. And we got to this place, and we started working, and suddenly we see a jeep running down the runway, and he screams to us, "Get out of here! Get out of here!" We know that the Egyptians the Mitzim are advancing, and we're going to get caught if we don't leave here. And we had a radio, we tried to get hold of our base in Bir Gafkafa, in Refidim, and the Egyptians had jammed the airwaves, and we couldn't get hold of the base. So we asked one of the officers of this tank base, where are you going? Should we join you? So they said they're going down to Abu Rades, where the oil fields are, to protect the oil fields. So we said, okay, can we come with you? So they said, yes, come, but you've got to drive without lights. So we drove with the convoy down to Abu Rades. On our way down early in the morning, they drove at night. Early in the morning, we got attacked by Mitzri helicopters.
Egyptian helicopters.
They did not know what to do. One of them landed on a bit of a mountain, not a mountain, but a heap of stones, tipped over. Another one tried to land, and the chevra from the tank corps jumped out of their tanks, rounded them all up, and gave them to me, and said, "You got to tie them all up." I tell you, the officers, the Egyptian officers, were well dressed, but the plain Egyptian soldiers were in rags. Their underwear was rags. They were badly. Anyway, I did my best to tie them up, put them all together in a wired enclosure, and we carried on. We carried on to Abu Rades, and there was a whole convoy on a hill, waiting for instructions what to do. And as we were waiting, it was Erev Sukkot. So our chevra said, "Let's build a sukkah. We got nothing to do. Let's build a sukkah." Where to build a sukkah? We saw that on one of the ammunition trucks there was behind the cab there was a frame, and palm trees, there were millions of them. So the chevra went and cut down these palm trees, brought, and we built a sukkah. And we said, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to make Kiddush. And 6 o'clock came, there was about 50 or 60 of the guys, not only our chevra, but also from all the other convoys, came onto this truck, and the moment, and not only that, out of the desert, we see a guy coming towards us. Nobody could believe it. There was a guy coming towards us. He came, he said, I'm from Chabad. I've got Arba Minim for you with a bottle of wine.
Wow.
We could not believe it. He'd come out of the desert.
Wow.
We couldn't believe it. So we were about to make Kiddush on this truck when we heard, Egyptian bombers. And one of them had seen us on this hill and was banking to hit us, bomb us. And as he banked, he went a little bit too low, and his wingtip on one side hit the ground, and the whole plane exploded. Anyway,
it's a miracle you're alive. I mean, he could have...
That's why I'm telling you, these are not just Nissim which happened to me in Vienna. I've had a life of Nissim.
A life of Nissim.
I've had a life, Baruch Hashem, I've had a life of Nissim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has looked after me, Baruch Hashem.
And Dov, finally, can I just ask, what message do you impart onto your children and your grandchildren from what you've experienced through your lifetime? What message would you like to give the future generations?
I've made a trust for my grandchildren, and I've also made a will, and attached to this will is a letter which describes what I have learned in the past 50 years. And I've given them some connection and insights to what is important for them to learn. I mean, some of it they will be learning anyway, but like, for instance, the Baal Shem Tov, Megillat Neshirim from the Ramchal, things like that which are normally not learned, they should learn. They should see what is the ikar of life, what is the ikar of learning, what is the ikar of tefillah. That's the message I want to give to them.
And what message would you give to future generations, to Am Yisrael, to the next generation, from your experiences?
Look, I don't see much hope for Jews out of Eretz Israel. Yes, in a way it's comforting. You know, you can travel when you're able to travel. You can travel to different areas of, pretty areas of the world. I mean, we often go to Switzerland to see my daughter there, my two daughters there, and we stay with one of my daughters, and we go up to the mountains. We go, it's absolutely beautiful. But it's not really what Yiddish, Jewish life is all about. It's the world is beautiful. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a beautiful world, and we have to see this world as much as we can, but the world is not a true world. It's a world of sheker. It's not a true world. It's yes, what you can see, but there's always an undercurrent. This underneath the carpet is the true world. Underneath the carpet is the true world. What goes on in a Goddess Baruch Hu's realm, underneath the carpet, that is the true world. And by acknowledging and by learning some of the data that I'm giving to my future generations, they will be able to understand this. Which is normally, I'll tell you something else. I believe, and Rabbi Weinberg has tried, he's issued a number of sforim for young frum boys, and it's called Derech Eretz. And there are illustrations, and these illustrations show a scene. Okay, two boys are in school, and one boy says, I don't like you today, I'm not going to be your friend today. And, okay, they go home after school, and the boy who was hurt goes to his home, and suddenly there's a knock on the door by the boy who said, I don't want to be you. So what should the boy who was hurt do? And you're given a number of options. Should he just slam the door and say, I don't want you either? Should he let the boy in? Should he tell the boy, okay, why didn't you like me today? All these options. And it shows what Derech Eretz should be. And he also did something a couple of years ago, which was amazing. He went to the Gerer Rebbe, he went to the Belzer Rebbe, he went to the Vigilance Rebbe, he went to Rav Eliyav, he went to Rav Steinmetz, he went to all the big Rabbanim, and he said to them, we need to have a different structure in our Jewish lives. Are you willing to come to a meeting where all these different interests will merge, will discuss, and maybe we can come to some understanding and change the Jewish world as it should be? They all agreed to come to this meeting. This meeting was set for 24 days after Rabbi Weinberg had got the agreement to everybody to come. In the meantime, Rabbi Eliashiv and Rabbi Steinmetz were hospitalized, and they couldn't come. And the whole thing fell apart. And Rabbi Weinberg said, I tried, but it was just not the right time. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said it was not the right time. And I heard a lot from Rebbe Liebman, who I trusted with every little detail of my life. By the way, Rebbe Liebman, I'll just tell you a little bit about him. He was he had to supervise Shechita in the East End of London, and it took him an hour and a half to get there to the Beit of Shechita and an hour and a half back. So somebody said to him, after he had the tircha of all this travelling, and he only went once every week, I think, but it was very difficult. Anyway, he lost time for learning, so that was why it was difficult for him. Anyway, so somebody suggested, why don't you buy a car? Well, you'll get there in 35, 40 minutes. So he said, I'm not going to drive. So he asked the Rebbe, will you learn to drive? So the Rebbe said, yes. So he said, okay, we're going to buy a car. And they bought an old car, an old banger, and they got a tutor, a driving instructor for the Rebbitzin. He came to me, Rebbe Liebman came to me, and he said to me, because he knew that I taught all my kids to drive, and they all passed first time. So he said to me, would you sit next to the Rebbitzin and instructor. Apart from the instructor, in the times when he can't come, you go out with us driving. So I said, I'll do it with pleasure. That would not happen today. That would not happen in the film world today. But Rebbe Liebman wanted it, I did it, and she passed first time.
Wow. Well, Dov, it's been amazing, and I just want to thank you so much. It really has been. So I'm just going to. I just want to really thank you. It's been compelling hearing your story and looking at these beautiful pictures and hearing your journey, which has been really amazing. And really, you are such an example we can all emulate. Really, you are so positive. You have such emunah. It's really, really been very special. And I've known your family here in Beit Vegan for many years since we first came.
Yeah.
And it really has been such a privilege to meet you in your own
Thank
home.
You very much.
And
Thank
I
you
really
very much
appreciate
for the work
relating.
that you've done, doing the video. And we should hear Gittab series, and it's a
good news.
It's a good time now before Purim Machulash. Something very special, because we should use these 3 days especially for tefillas, tehillim, and put our whole efforts into getting HaKadosh Baruch Hu to, because Purim, all the other Yom Tovim, when Mashiach comes, will disappear, but Purim will stay. Purim is just as important as Yom Kippur. In fact, more important. That's what I learned.
Well, Dov, thank you so much.
With pleasure.
You should have all of Hashem's blessings.
Amen.
May Besrim in very good health.
Amen. Amen.
And nachas and bracha.
Amen.